Welcome to our History Now podcast. You know, what if I told you that Frederick Douglass's most famous 4th of July speech...
Right, the big one.
Yeah, that it wasn't actually delivered on the 4th of July.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. And what if I told you that a battle fought down in Mexico in 1867 is actually the primary reason you have Juneteenth off from work today?
Which is a piece of history that gets completely overlooked.
Entirely overlooked. You know, when we look at a calendar, we usually think of it as something fixed, a permanent grid of days, months, and years that just marches forward, ticking away like clockwork.
Right. Society treats it like it's just a neutral mathematical way to measure time.
Exactly. But then you start looking at the history of Black folks in this country, our history, and suddenly that calendar isn't a neutral way to measure time at all. It is an absolute battlefield.
It really is. I mean, it's a contested space where freedom is claimed, violently fought over, and, sometimes entirely erased from the public memory.
And that is exactly our mission for you today. We are thoroughly unpacking a really fascinating stack of historical analyses, news articles, and cultural essays that just completely dismantle and rebuild the complex relationship between Black Americans and the concept of American independence.
Yeah, we're going to look right past the fireworks and the barbecues.
Because to really understand this, we have to trace a historical thread that traditional education often, frankly, conveniently ignores.
Definitely. We are going from the forgotten Black patriots of 1776 to the grassroots creation of alternative holidays, straight through to the untold and quite violent defense of Juneteenth in 1867.
By the time we finish this conversation, you're going to completely rethink what that American calendar hanging on your wall actually represents. So let's get right into it.
Yeah.
To understand why a holiday like Juneteenth even had to be created in the first place, we really have to go back to the original Independence Day.
Right, the baseline.
Yeah, we have to look at the paradox of what the word freedom actually meant for our ancestors at the birth of the nation. And here is where it gets really interesting, because mainstream history often overlooks the fact that an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 African Americans actually served in the Revolutionary War.
Which is just a staggering number when you consider the overall population at the time. I mean, they weren't just background characters.
No, not
But they were central to the military effort.
They absolutely were. Take Prince Estabrook, for example. He was an enslaved man who stood on Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775.
Day one
of the war. And he was wounded by a musket ball on that very first day. But he didn't stop there. He marched on to fight at Bunker Hill. He served 8 long years in the military before finally winning his freedom.
Wow.
But, I read in the text that he won his freedom through the Quack Walker cases in Massachusetts. And I have to admit, I don't fully understand what those cases were. How exactly did a court case in the 1780s actually secure a Black soldier's freedom?
That is a great question, because the mechanics of how freedom was won are so important. So, Quack Walker was an enslaved man in Massachusetts who essentially sued for his freedom.
Okay.
And his legal argument was based on the brand new Massachusetts state constitution, which had just been written to include the phrase, "all men are born free and equal."
Using their own words against them.
Exactly. The state's Supreme Judicial Court looked at that language and basically said, well, if we truly mean what we just wrote, slavery is incompatible with our Constitution.
That's amazing.
Right. So by judicial decree, those cases effectively abolished slavery in Massachusetts, which is how men like Estabrook legally secured their status after fighting.
Wow. And even George Washington himself noted that Black soldiers were the absolute backbone of the Army.
They really were. But, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to confront the brutal irony of Estabrook's service. These men were fighting and bleeding for a national freedom that was deliberately, legally being withheld from them across the majority of the colonies. The colonial legal system was architected to ensure that even if a Black person was nominally free, they were never equal.
Let's talk about how they architected that, because the laws on the books were just suffocating.
Oh, they were incredibly oppressive. Let's look at the specifics. In Virginia in 1705, the law mandated 30 lashes on the bare back for any Black person who struck a white person, even in clear, undeniable self-defense.
Which is just horrific.
And it gets worse. By 1732, Virginia banned free Black people from owning horses, cattle, or hogs.
Wait, which in an agrarian society was the only real way to build generational wealth.
Exactly. If you owned livestock, it was legally seized by the state and sold to fund the parish poor. You were legally mandated into poverty.
Wow.
Then you look at South Carolina's 1740 Negro Act. This made it a criminal offense to teach any black person to read or write. It required every single free black person to have a white guardian to vouch for them.
Unbelievable.
And it banned any gathering of more than 7 black people. And across every Southern colony, free black people were required to carry written travel passes just to walk down the public road.
It's like trying to play a board game where the opposing player secretly rewrites the rules every single time you roll the dice, just to make absolutely sure you never, ever reach the finish line.
That is the perfect analogy.
You have this concept of freedom, but it only existed inside these incredibly suffocating boundaries drawn by white lawmakers.
Right. And it raises an important question for us to think about. If the calendar's ultimate holiday of freedom, July 4th, represented a liberty that legally and systematically excluded you, what do?
You make your own calendar.
Exactly.
Which is what brings us to that mind-blowing realization about Frederick Douglass. We all know his legendary 1852 speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July."
Of course. This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
Right. You may rejoice, I must mourn. But here's a detail that completely flipped the script for me. Douglass actually delivered that speech on July 5th, not the 4th.
And that one-day shift is everything. It wasn't just a scheduling conflict or a mistake.
But I'm struggling to reconcile this a bit. If July 4th was so dangerous and the hypocrisy of it was so painful, why did Black New Yorkers celebrate independence at all during that era? Like, why not just completely abandon the concept of American independence if it was actively being used as a weapon against us?
Well, because abandoning the concept would mean surrendering their claim to this country, a country they built.
Makes sense.
Yeah. As historian Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. points out in the texts, July 5th was a widely celebrated holiday in the Black community known as New York's Abolition Day.
Okay.
It commemorated the end of slavery in New York, which officially happened on July 4, 1827. But they celebrated on the 5th for 2 very distinct reasons.
Go on.
First, it was a sharp, ironic critique of the hypocrisy of white Americans celebrating on the 4th. They're saying, we will celebrate actual abolition on the 5th because your 4th is a lie.
Wow, that's powerful.
And second, it was a matter of sheer survival.
See, think about the calendar hanging on your wall right now. You view the 4th and the 5th of July as just, a Thursday and a Friday. But for a Black family in New York in the 1830s, the difference between walking outside to celebrate on that Thursday versus that Friday was literally a matter of life and death.
Incredibly dangerous. I mean, Black New Yorkers knew that white celebrations on the 4th often devolve into drunken anti-Black rioting.
Right.
In 1834, a white mob used the July 4th momentum to attack and burn down the Chatham Street Church.
Jesus.
So gathering on the 5th was a strategic, logistical choice for physical safety while still fiercely demanding the space to celebrate true liberation.
And it wasn't just July 5th. Our ancestors carved out a whole alternate calendar of lost holidays.
They really did. There was January 1st, which honored both the 1808 end of the transatlantic slave trade and the 1804 Haitian independence.
Oh.
There was August 1st, marking the 1834 abolition of slavery in the British West Indies. And May 1st, tracing back to 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina, where formerly enslaved people gathered to bury and decorate the graves of fallen Union soldiers.
Which, as the historical analysis points out, actually birthed the national holiday of Memorial Day.
Exactly.
So if we step back for a second, if we give up these specific dates, do we lose the cultural values tied to them? Is the historical amnesia we see so often right now a direct result of us losing control of our own calendar?
I think that is the exact danger the authors are warning us about. Holidays are institutional memory. When you stop circling a date on the calendar, the values that date represents start to fade from the collective consciousness of the next generation.
Which means we really have to talk about the holiday that we did manage to hold on to.
Juneteenth.
Yes. The instinct to reclaim the calendar and mark actual milestones of our liberation ultimately leads us to Juneteenth. But, according to our reading today, a massive defining piece of the Juneteenth narrative has been entirely forgotten.
Yes. This is a crucial historical correlation that completely changes how we understand the holiday.
Okay, let's set the baseline that we all know. The traditional story, June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas, backed by armed Black troops.
Right.
He enforces General Order Number 3. officially freeing 250,000 enslaved people in Texas who had been kept in the dark about the Emancipation Proclamation. But I want to pause here. We always hear about General Order Number 3 being read from a balcony, but what did that piece of paper actually do logistically on the ground in Texas?
It was a massive legal mechanism. It didn't just casually say, you are free.
Right, it had teeth.
General Order Number 3 explicitly voided the property rights of enslavers. It legally restructured society in an instant by declaring an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves.
It's huge.
It transformed the legal status of 250,000 people from property to citizens with labor rights.
But a piece of paper from a general doesn't enforce itself.
Exactly. And that is where the research brought forward by Dr. Gerald Horne becomes so vital. He introduces this correlation, what he calls the second Juneteenth. And this happened exactly 2 years later on June 19th, 1867.
Hold on, I got to jump in here. Mexico.
Yes, Mexico.
When we are taught Juneteenth in school, it is strictly a Texas-centric narrative. How did ex-Confederates crossing an international border become a threat to enslaved people in Galveston?
It's an incredible piece of erased history. Following the Civil War, thousands of ex-Confederates refused to accept defeat.
Of course they did.
Right. So they fled across the southern border into Mexico. There, they began plotting with the French puppet regime led by Emperor Maximilian, who was trying to control Mexico at the time.
Okay.
The ex-Confederates' goal was to ally with the French, regroup their military forces, cross back over the border, retake Texas, re-enslave the black population, and literally restart the Civil War from the South.
That is terrifying. They were trying to reboot the Confederacy in Mexico.
Precisely. But it was the armed black Union troops stationed along the border who fought against this contingency. They waged a fierce, grueling campaign and ultimately defeated this resurgent Confederate threat.
Wow.
And the final fatal blow to that plot came when the French puppet leader, Maximilian, was executed by Mexican forces. And the date of his execution, June 19th, 1867.
That is unbelievable. So June 19th is pulling double duty.
It is. And the stakes of that 1867 victory cannot be overstated. If those armed black troops hadn't stopped the ex-Confederates in Mexico, the promise of the 1865 Juneteenth would have been utterly crushed.
Wow.
The freedom declared on that balcony in Galveston would have been completely temporary.
Yeah, declaring freedom in 1865 was like passing a law in Washington but having no police force to enact it in a distant desert. The paper was completely meaningless until armed black men physically stood between the freed people and those who wanted them back in chains.
That's exactly it.
Freedom isn't just declared, it has to be violently and continuously defended after the ink dries.
Absolutely. The ink on General Order Number 3 didn't magically stop bullets 2 years later. Freedom required a sustained physical defense.
And what's wild is that even after securing that freedom on the battlefield in 1867, the fight didn't end. It just changed venues. It took over a century to get Juneteenth formally recognized by the state. The battlefield moved from the Texas border to the Texas legislature.
Because for a long time, the holiday was kept alive entirely by community roots. It wasn't state-sanctioned. It was sustained by the people themselves.
The details of those early Juneteenths are just so vivid. I mean, families would dig literal holes in the ground to make massive pits for holiday barbecues.
Oh, yeah.
And I read this detail that just stuck with me. In segregated Texas, June 19th was the single day of the year that black folks were legally allowed to enter the local amusement park.
Just one day.
One single day. Kids saving up their nickels and dimes all year just for that one afternoon of joy. It's beautiful, but it's also just a stark reminder of the parameters placed around their lives.
Which is why the fight to institutionalize the holiday was so important. Enter Albert Ely Edwards.
Right.
He was a Baptist minister, a veteran of the Civil Rights Movement, and a Texas state legislator. In 1979, just a year into his political career, he made it his mission to make Juneteenth an official state holiday.
And he walked into an absolute buzzsaw of opposition.
Complete resistance.
Oh.
When he first started floating the bill, the white legislators uniformly said no.
Naturally.
They cited the cost to the state budget. They claimed state employees already had too many days off. But underlying it all was the fear of losing their seats for supporting what was viewed as a black holiday.
And this is where the mechanics of politics come in. Edwards didn't quit.
He didn't. He used incredible political savviness. It took 7 different rewrites of the bill. He had to navigate intense backroom compromises and diplomacy to finally get it passed in 1980, making Texas the first state to officially recognize Juneteenth.
And the texts we are exploring today point out something really profound about where Edwards got that resilience. It was deeply anchored in the Black church.
Yes. His father, Eldridge Edwards, was a pastor who planted a church in Houston during the height of Jim Crow.
Right.
But Eldridge was also a precinct judge. He was a man who would sit up all night long, counting votes by hand to ensure his community's political rights were protected.
Think about this. You have Al Edwards in the 1970s walking the halls of the state capitol with this elaborate legislative flowchart, trying to whip votes for a holiday.
Yeah.
And a generation before, you have his father, Eldridge, sitting in a dimly lit room, staying awake all night just to make sure Black votes were actually counted.
It's powerful.
It's the exact same stubborn refusal to bow to white supremacy. They just use different tools to get the job done.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. They understood that institutionalizing memory and protecting political rights are two sides of the same coin of freedom.
Which brings us to a critical realization. Edwards fought this massive battle to institutionalize memory in 1980. But looking at the data in front of us today, you realize that protecting the memory of freedom doesn't automatically protect the mechanics of freedom.
No, it doesn't.
Before we dive into these modern statistics, we want to make it clear that we are impartially reporting the viewpoints and data contained in today's articles. We aren't taking any political sides, but simply conveying the ideas the authors present about the current state of Black America.
And looking at the data presented in these texts, the modern landscape is sobering. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the U.S. population, but according to the analysis, account for more than 1/3 of the incarcerated population.
That's a huge disparity.
Right. And the reporting highlights that Black individuals are disproportionately more likely to face wrongful convictions, which strips families apart and weakens community futures.
And the articles also highlight severe concerns on the legal front, too.
Yes. There is significant focus on the Supreme Court scaling back the Voting Rights Act, specifically citing a recent ruling in Louisiana v. Calais.
Now, this is dense legal jargon. How exactly does this ruling narrow protections against racial vote dilution? Like, what does vote dilution actually look like on the ground?
So vote dilution happens through practices like packing and cracking.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Sure. It's either packing all Black voters into one single district so they only get one representative, or cracking them apart across several districts so their vote is always outweighed by a white majority.
I see.
The Louisiana v. Calais ruling essentially makes it legally harder for civil rights groups to challenge those racially drawn maps in court under the Voting Rights Act, diluting the collective power of the Black vote.
Wow.
Furthermore, the texts point to the rapid unwinding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI initiatives across corporate and educational sectors as new barriers to opportunity.
It's a heavy reality. But what I loved about these texts is that they don't just leave us in the struggle. They enthusiastically point to the triumphs happening right now today.
Absolutely.
Between 2017 and 2023, Black entrepreneurship grew by an astounding 62%. Millions of Black-owned businesses are generating hundreds of billions of dollars. But I have to ask you, is that 62% spike a coincidence? Or is it a necessity-driven response? Like, if the corporate doors are closing because DEI is unwinding, are we just building our own doors?
I think the texts suggest it is absolutely necessity-driven resilience. We are building our own incomes. And as of 2024, nearly 28% of Black adults hold at least a bachelor's degree.
That's incredible progress.
It is. We're educating our communities and pushing forward despite the institutional barriers. If we synthesize this back to where we started, it brings us right back to Frederick Douglass.
Right.
Revisiting his 1852 words today isn't just a history lesson. It's an invitation to consider both the systemic struggles we still face in the justice system at the ballot box and the undeniable progress that has been built generation by generation against all odds.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with Prince Esterbrook bleeding on the grass at Lexington Green in 1775, fighting for a country that had laws on the books to steal his livelihood.
Yeah.
We looked at the strategic creation of July 5th Abolition Day to critique a hypocritical system. We unearthed the mind-blowing correlation of the armed Black troops saving the promise of Juneteenth down in Mexico in 1867.
An incredible story.
And we saw Al Edwards using the endurance of the Black church to institutionalize that memory in Texas.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've seen throughout this conversation how holidays were invented as strategic tools of resistance, of safety, and of cultural memory. So looking at the monumental cultural, legal, and technological shifts happening right now in the 21st century, what future date will our descendants circle on their calendars as a newly won holiday of liberation?
That is a great question.
And perhaps more importantly, what will we have to relentlessly defend today to ensure they actually get to celebrate it tomorrow?
Because as we've seen, whoever controls the calendar controls the narrative. So keep exploring, stay curious, and keep making history. Thank you for joining us.